Hello. This is one of my earlier paintings. I was a scientific illustrator at the Field Museum of Natural History. Prior to coming to Northern to start the illustration program, and also the scientific illustration program. This one, I've always been painting and drawing. I grew up in Chicago, so I always hung out at the Field Museum, Museum of Science and Industry, the Art Institute. It's just someplace I was always at. So this was actually the last painting I did as a senior year as an undergraduate in college. This is acrylic done on a masonite board, and I've always been interested in everything, looking very closely at everything, trying to figure out how things work. When you're dealing with outer space, you use a telescope. In college, my science courses were all in astronomy. Otherwise, if you're looking at the micro world, you're using a microscope. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how I became one of 7 scientific illustrators working in a museum setting in the country. I had no idea before I got the job that the job even existed. When I was finished with my master's degree in painting and drawing, I was back in Chicago. Time to get real and get a job. So I was at the Field Museum, which was really not all that unusual. And I had this idea. I started looking at their display cases, thinking that maybe they needed an artist to kind of work on them. They're looking a little bit kind of old and dusty and kind of messed up. So I was thinking, well, maybe I need someone to help touch them up and paint on them. So one of the preparators was working there, so I asked him about that. He gave me the name of the art director of the museum. So I proceeded to go to the phone, give him a call, made an appointment for the next day to interview. So these were the kind of pieces I was bringing, plus a few landscapes. That was my portfolio. Well, as it happened, they weren't looking for anyone to do the backdrops, but they were looking for someone to do scientific illustration. Scientific illustrator is a generalist. They have 4 different areas of the museum, from botany, paleontology, anthropology, and insects, entomology. So, but if someone's offering you a position to try out for, say, sure. This piece in particular was the one that kind of probably got me the job, because they were looking for someone primarily working in botany, and they wanted to have the research started back in either the 17th or 18th century, where they used line crosshatch engravings for the illustrations, and they were looking for someone to be able to do line crosshatch illustration. As a scientific illustrator, I was first working in botany, and this is a liverwort. Liverwort is not really quite microscopic. It's like somewhere just right above or below a moss in the scale of complexity of plants. But if you look at this, these little plants, I might looked at this one, I felt it was almost like a whale jumping out of the water. You have to kind of bring them to life, give them personality. Even though you're dealing with a dead plant specimen, that's part of it. So you have to make them look lifelike. You have to, work with them. Now, the scientist is the ultimate authority. First, what I do is go into the laboratory. He'd show me the specimen. He'd explain to me what he wanted for me to illustrate. I would do a preliminary drawing in pencil, bring it back to the scientist, and he would give, modified, okay it. Then I'd take it back to my table. I have this pencil drawing. I put a sheet of clear, transparent acetate over it, and then I have to start inking it. Then they would be inserted into a plate, and these are actually what they would go into as a publication by scientists for scientists. So then when the scientists would go out in the field and looking for this kind of a plant specimen, they would go back to this and they could research it and find exactly what they were looking for by these kind of details. Now the smaller, these are actually like 9, 10, 8, 9, 10. These are all cell structures. The scientists would be doing that, and I'd be doing the big ones. I was like one of 3 scientific illustrators in the museum. And like I said, there were only 7 in the country. It was just a wonderful work experience, just the environment. And also it was interesting because all these scientists, they go out into the field and they collect these specimens, and they've been around the world. So in some respect, it was my travel agency to all kinds of third world countries. And then I was also working in ferns of Guatemala. So now the way you would do this, like you'd have to dry, you have a plate, what's called a plate. They go out in the field and they collect these specimens and they dry them out, and so they bring them back dry. And then I would go and do a full size, it's called a habit shot, and then you'd have to do the microscopic views, and they would show what they were looking for. And with something like this, sometimes the way I would do it is I'd work with pencil, I'd work with 3 different color pens, because keeping track of what kind of detail I was kind of collecting and drawing, I had my own system to work with. And then I'd bring it back to the scientists. We put it together composition-wise, and ultimately would go off to the printer. Now, the reason why I got the job and my predecessor got fired was that, we both all had art backgrounds. When he was working on one of these, his artistic sense of composition got in the way of scientific research. He'd be doing one of these illustrations, be bringing it back, but artistically you said, well, this branch should go this way, curve around that way, for a sense of balance and composition. He'd bring it back to the scientist. Scientist said, no, it really does go down here. He could not make the adjustment, so he got fired. Science trumps art. I also went into paleontology, and this was a jawbone of some reptile dinosaur that crawled out of the muck that, for the life of me, did not find all that interesting, but the scientist was obviously very interested in this. A lot of times, it wasn't my job to question whether the scientific research was how important it was. It was just my job to make it look good.